Welcome to Find Myself Free, the podcast, where we break up with booze, balance our hormones, and heal from the inside out. I'm Ellie Young, certified alcohol-free life coach and functional nutrition practitioner in training. And I'm here to help you break free from the drinking cycle and unlock your best health. After decades of gray area drinking, I was fascinated by my own capacity for change. Now I've made it my mission to pay this gift forward by sharing the biggest game-changing lessons from neuroscience to positive psychology to functional nutrition, all so you can take back your power, balance your hormones, use food as medicine, and feel better than ever. Sobriety is just the beginning. Let's heal, thrive, and create a life you love. Let's dive in. Today, I'm sharing a fellow sobriety coach who has a really unique take on his coaching style. Meet Austin Karr, a sobriety and happiness coach who believes happiness is the opposite of addiction. With over a decade of sobriety and years of coaching experience, he helps people move beyond just quitting drinking to building a life that feels exciting, fulfilling, and truly their own. Austin's approach centers on self-trust, emotional awareness, and intentional living, key elements of what he calls the keys to happiness: knowing who you are, trusting yourself, and living with intention. Through his one-on-one and group coaching programs, Austin helps people take a break from alcohol and reconnect with what truly makes them happy. His work empowers individuals to cultivate joy, resilience, and confidence, so they don't just stay sober, they become boldly happy. I hope you enjoy today's guest, and now on to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Find Myself Free. I have an amazing guest for you today. Welcome to the show, Austin Karr, sobriety and happiness coach. How are you, Austin?
I'm great, Ellie. How are you?
I'm great. I am so excited to talk to you because I have not met a fellow sobriety coach who puts happiness front and center in their title. That's pretty cool. Tell us about that.
I really discovered happiness fairly recently, actually. I had always had this feeling in my life that it, that happiness was somewhere else. It was never where I was. It was always in the future. It was always this place that I couldn't reach, or it was in the past. I had this feeling that I had experienced happiness before, but I could never get back there. And I remember sitting in my therapist's office years into our work together. And we were talking about success and this desire that I had for it. And I remember her looking at me and just saying, "Do you know what happiness is?" And I had no idea how to answer that question.
Mm.
And this became a quest of mine to try and figure out as much as I could about happiness and about having it in the present. And I've firmly come to believe that it is either in the future or the past, or it's with us today, but it cannot be in both. And I have just made it my life's mission to find as much happiness in my life as I can.
Wow, that's really cool. I think that is something people are constantly chasing. And as it relates to alcohol, it's usually in a way of like, I have to change my current state of being. Whatever I'm after now it's like because I don't like where I'm at. Like it's like I want to change my state. Um, your perspective that happiness is the opposite of addiction. So explain a little more about that.
Yeah, I happiness keeps me in the present moment. Happiness keeps me here. And when I am here, I can do all kinds of things in my life. I can make all of the changes that I want to make in my life here. I can't make them in the future. I can't make them in the past. And so the idea that happiness is the opposite of addiction is this idea that we can be truly happy in our lives right now if we cultivate it. Not if we're chasing it, not if we're looking for it, but if we're truly growing it in our lives and paying attention to it every day. And what I've found with my clients and in my own life is that when I really work on cultivating it, I don't want anything else. My
Mhm.
life is the best that it can be. And it's not about ignoring the bad, but embracing the great things that are happening.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you kind of came to be in this new role.
I took a what I think is a really classic route to sobriety, which was started drinking in college and went through this path of like embracing alcohol as necessary in my life, a necessary ingredient in my life, and that there was no other option to it, that I had to drink. It had to be part of my life. And I fell into that romanticized notion of alcohol, that it made me funnier and it made me happier, and it was the root of the jobs that I got and the friendships that I had and my relationships. And it was just, it had interwoven itself into my life in every way.
Mhm.
And then it started to become really problematic.
Mhm.
And it took a long time to tease apart my life from alcohol, because it was everywhere. It was in every part of my life. I went from, the classic college drinker, and then drinking in my early 20s and my 30s. And I lost my first job due to alcohol and was like, well, that was a fluke.
Mhm.
And then I got another one, and that was the high point. That's one of those memories in my life where I'm like, that is when I was the happiest. It was at the end of my active addiction. Had the job that I had always wanted, and I was making the money that I wanted to make. And looking back, like, that's when I was happiest,
Mhm.
even though my life was miserable.
Mhm.
So, my family came to me one day, and said, "We really are worried about you, and you have to do something." And I agreed to quit drinking for 100 days. That was all I would commit to. I will not drink for 100 days.
Yeah.
And on day 25, I got fired from that job, and I stayed sober. I stayed sober for 100 days. And then my wife said, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, "I'm going to do another 100 days." And I have done that for 10 years. And then
Wow.
in the last 2 years, I really fell in love with helping other people to obtain what has really taken me a long time to get to, which is this really true happiness in my life. Because the first few years of my sobriety was not incredibly happy. It was getting by.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's how I ended up here, was this really long and winding journey, like so many other people, of like a long journey through addiction, and then this long winding journey through recovery, as I kind of rediscovered myself and who I was and rebuilt my life, and came to the point where I wanted something more.
So where was that shift, and how do you think that took place when it became, um, when you shifted out of kind of the lonely stage of early sobriety into this new phase where you're happy?
Yeah. The first 5 years that I spent in recovery was, uh, it wasn't bad, but it was just going through the motions of life.
Mhm.
And the amazing thing was, I accomplished a lot. I started a nonprofit in that time. I had a good job that I enjoyed. I had another daughter. Like, it wasn't bad. It
Mhm.
just wasn't what I wanted my life to be. But really, honestly, I thought that's what I deserved. I didn't think that I deserved a good life. I didn't think that I deserved to have a life that was filled with happiness. I thought I had wrecked my life, and that was what I deserved, to just have an okay existence. And I think that I did penance for 5 years. And then I started to pull out of that a little bit, but I kind of break my sobriety into like 3 big chunks. The first 5 years, in this middle point where I was like, something has to change here. I'm not going to drink, but it just doesn't feel like enough. This doesn't feel like enough in my life.
Mhm.
And I right about that point is when my therapist asked me that question about happiness. And I started reading about happiness and understanding it more. And this idea that if I can be happy here in my life now, I can achieve so much more. The possibilities in my life open up. I can see more. I can see more paths. I can be more creative. I can embrace who I am. And that became like then this, like, I all of a sudden wanted more of that. I had moved out of that, like, this is what I deserve into I deserve more.
Ah, that's really interesting. You teach now that happiness comes from three key elements. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that this was a big realization for me was I know the three keys to happiness for me are I know myself, I trust myself, and I live with intention. And when I think about that journey, those three things I had to take a really long time to put into place to
Mm.
start to understand who I was and what I wanted, how I could show up authentically in my life, what kind of friendships I wanted to be in, relationships I wanted to be in, the kind of work I wanted to do. And then I had to
Mm.
trust myself to act on those things, like knowing them is one part of it, but
Right.
trusting yourself to act on them and then setting direction in my life so that I know where I'm going. And every day I'm moving in a concentrated direction. And that's what I've boiled my experience down to. And that's what I try and teach my clients.
When did you start coaching in this journey?
Uh, about a year and a half ago,
Okay, so you were almost 8.5 years
8 years
into your
sober.
journey.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think that's a big key to your happiness now is being able to pay this forward?
I think so. Yeah. I want people to find what I've found in the last 2 years in the first 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be 8 years sober. And like I said, it's not like my life was bad. It's just,
Mm.
guys, it can be so much better. And I see people make this transition so quickly now. Like in, I have a program called 100 Days of Sobriety, and it mimics a lot of what I did in my first 100 days and then what I've learned about happiness. And I see people's lives completely change in 100 days.
Yeah.
And in some cases, their situation hasn't changed, but they've changed so much that they
Right.
see their lives completely differently.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's one of the less talked about parts of sobriety is that you can make these massive leaps in your own personal growth and desire to stay alcohol free. And you can even be really like secure in that, but that the world around you is still your old world. Um, and there's a mourning for like this part of yourself that doesn't participate in that anymore. And letting that go and letting yourself finally grow out of that and letting your life change, and letting a lot of things go, I think it's one of the harder parts that we don't talk about as much.
Yeah, there is that grieving process that is really, really important. And some people struggle so, like, that becomes a big sticking point as they try and move into this new life, is like hanging on to that old and realizing that, that was where they were, but they're somewhere else now, especially when we have people in our lives that are still part of that kind of old reality, that old paradigm.
Yeah.
And that happens in relationships or jobs or marriages, right? Where we are still kind of tethered to that old life, but we're moving in a new direction.
Yeah, and the different phases, are so interesting, and I would even say, and I'm curious what you think about this, like, I'm actually in a new phase of loneliness with my sobriety, and it's something that kinda just hit me this year, and I think part of it is that I'm very deep in my work with it, and it can't we work alone, and, even though we're, like, talking to people all day long, we're, and so I'm tired at the end of the day, and I don't wanna go out, and I don't wanna go do things. There was a part of me in early sobriety that was really more motivated to challenging myself to keep going out and being like, "I can do this, look at me, I'm having all this excitement and fun and exploring all these new things." Yes, it was different. I hung out with different people, I did different things, but now I've kinda been in this more even more of a hunker down hibernating mode, even though my work is so purpose driven and I'm really passionate about it. But I think I've lost a little bit of a cornerstone of my happiness in the social. I think I'm missing that a little bit right now.
Yeah. Our lives change over time, right? They
Yeah.
can become something different, and the things we need in a season, I don't know that I love that term, but it's like
Yeah.
seems so descriptive.
Yeah.
Like what we need right now looks like this, and kind of accepting that as part of like, okay, this is who I am right now, and being comfortable with it is really, really important. Like I've definitely had periods in my sobriety where I was really outgoing and new things were happening and I was challenging myself and I had a lot of growth. And then there's been times where like what I need right now is to recenter and refocus, and my direction has shifted. And I think it's important that we understand that, like, that's part of that. Like, again, going back to that, I know myself, I know what I need right now. It's not always the same. And that
Mhm.
I trust myself to act on that. Um, that's, and maybe that's just where you are right now.
Yeah, I try not to like shame myself about it. Again, that's like shame is like such a familiar word in the alcohol, the sobriety space, right? Where we're like there's some sort of dark cloud that follows this journey, even if it's as positive and like I'm the healthiest I've ever been, you know. Um it is really I'm so curious about how you help people make the shift. Like what is kind of your step 1 for getting people to bridge the gap between kind of that initial loneliness and kind of like departure from their old life?
Yeah. The very first thing that I work with clients, well, the first thing we do is we do triggers work. It's just like when I start with somebody on a 100 days of sobriety journey, like we're doing triggers work and the tools we're going to use, whether that's mindfulness work or meditation or breathing exercise, some really classic things but digging into those initial triggers is really important. The very next thing that we shift to, so week 1 that we work together, we're focused on that. Week 2, we go to strengths and I
Mhm.
have them do strength journaling every single day. We're working on how did you show up? What was the strength you used? Who helped you in this situation? So they can start to like build this picture of their lives that's with them centered in their strengths. And the amazing thing to me is how much that powers the rest of our time together because they really start to believe that they're in control of a lot of their lives where it felt so out of control before. So strengths becomes this real cornerstone. Really frequently from there, we'll go into wins. And I am a big proponent of noticing the wins. It's awareness of the changes that are happening. So I challenge my clients to do 10 wins a day,
Ooh,
every
that's a
single
lot.
day. 10 wins a day.
Yeah.
Getting up and making breakfast, that's 2 wins, right? Like, sometimes we think big wins. Um, I sat on my daughter was feeling a little emotional this morning, and we sat together on the bench, before she left to school, and she put her arm through mine, and that was a win for me. That was this big
Yeah.
glimmer moment in my day today, and that's carried me through so much of today. So when
Yeah.
we go strengths and wins and we start to build this picture of our lives as changing and good and we're in control, that really sets the tone for how my clients start to view themselves. And then
Yeah.
often we start to build trust really quickly as well. We'll do something really simple like uh, 2 things you're going to do today and then celebrating those 2 successes. So something really simple, get that energy going. And so we start building this picture of who I am and that I can trust myself really early in our relationship together.
Oh, I love that. Talk a little bit more about strengths. I'm not sure I grasp what you mean there. So is this like things that they're doing well, things that they're already good at? Like what how would you journal about your strengths?
Sure. So I ask my clients to think about experiences that they've had during the day and how their actions created that experience. So let's say they're at work and a coworker needs help with a project and they're just an organizer. Maybe they're
Mhm.
that kind of person. So I helped my coworker because I am an organizer and I did this thing for them. So I helped them get their paperwork together or I gave them some direction or I gave them some advice. So I can start to recognize that strength of mine as a organizer, for example. Or a friend of mine's having a really bad day and I took him dinner.
Mhm.
And one of my strengths is caring.
Mhm.
I'm incredibly caring. And so I went out of my way to go take. So they really start to notice not only the people in their lives that they're impacting, but how their actions are impacting their own lives. And so we start to just do those kinds of things. I also have my clients often do either Clifton Strength Finders or the VIA Strength Finders strengths work so that they can get an outside picture as well.
Oh, I'm not familiar with those. The Clifton and the yeah, tell us more
Yeah.
about that.
Clifton Strength Finders is used to be called Gallup Strength Finders. And it is a fairly lengthy, like, personality test, if you will.
Okay.
And I can't remember how many questions it is. It takes about 45 minutes to go through it.
Oh,
But the
wow.
end, it goes through 30, I think it's 30 strengths, and it gives you your top five.
Okay.
And so you start to understand, and it's broken down into five categories. So you can really start to get an idea. Like, my strengths are almost all in strategic thinking. So I
Okay.
have lots of ideas. I
Mhm.
have lots of new thoughts. I am great at seeing into the future and seeing what's around the corner, but I am not good at execution.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
is not my strength. And
Mhm.
so when I know that, I know how I can show up in my life. And I also know where I need to maybe shore that up a little bit. So
Sure.
I love to spend a whole bunch of time in thinking about new things and that kind of stuff. But if I don't lean into one of my less strength parts of my life,
Yeah.
um, I can end up with a pile of new ideas and no action on any of them. So
Yeah.
the other one is VIA, and VIA, VIA is another strength finders, and it gives you a bunch of your strengths. Both of those have free versions and paid versions. So I almost always have my clients do the free version, and then they
Yeah.
can choose to get like a longer report as well.
I love this. People love doing quizzes. It's like
Right?
horoscope, personality, it's like when we were teenagers and we'd fill out I don't know if guys did this as much, but, like, there's always the quizzes in the magazines about what
Oh,
type
I
are
do all of
you?
them.
Yeah, yeah. I love that stuff, and I think what I like about this is this reframe and this focus, again, it's about the intentional focus of where you're taking their brain on this journey is like, I'm focusing on what I'm doing well right now instead of focusing on where I've been and any sort of shame and any sort of like mistakes or past. And like, it's that difference between looking ahead and connecting with your future self and looking back at a version of yourself you're not proud of.
Right. I think so often we're encouraged to look at where we're weak, right? Where
Yeah.
we're broken and what we need to fix. And there's actually some really interesting research out there that if you look at those things, even if you fix one of them, you can actually get into this loop of continuing to look for where you're broken,
Mm,
look for where you're weak, look for where you need to improve. And so you
yeah.
spend all of your time in my weaknesses,
Yeah.
versus into like, how am I changing what levers can I pull to make my life better? And you can go, oh, I am really great at connection. I am really great um, at coming up with new ideas. How can I lean into that rather than where am I broken?
I really like that. I think, and they've talked about this a little bit, not to like go down on a talk therapy, but I think a lot of times that's focusing on the past and kind of reinforcing those old patterns of like, I am this way because of this story and this thing happened to me in trauma. While understanding that is super important, I think the big distinction between like therapists and what we do is coaches are focused on the future. Coaches are focused on taking you to this version of yourself that is aspirational. And I think a lot of times we have to kind of steer people back in that direction because they want to justify the way they've been. They want to justify their drinking and justify and honestly, we've probably heard every story under the sun when it comes to drinking. People think I've got the worst story. I've got the darkest, deepest thing that I wouldn't, and we were all like, I've heard that. I've heard that too. Me too. Like and it's like, but that doesn't concern me. What I want to know is where you want to go. And I don't think people have enough perspective, and I don't think people have experienced enough of that happiness that they're after to really even know what's possible, right? To paint that picture and to be like, I want to connect to that person. And one of my favorite happiness, positive psychology people is Benjamin Hardy. And he talks about how this future self, connecting to that person, that has more of an impact on how you behave, your future versus who you were in the past. And I just love that idea. And if you are focused on moving forward, that's going to have a bigger impact on how you operate in the day to day versus looking backwards and being like, ugh, I did that. How do I recover from that?
Yeah. I actually have my clients. I remember I did an outpatient program. That's how one of the things I did when I got sober in my first 100 days.
Hmm.
And we had to write a goodbye letter. And I remember when I started coaching, I was like, oh, that seemed like such a great thing. And the more I looked into it, and the more I looked into happiness and the positive psychology, and I looked into what Dr. Laurie Santos is doing at the Happiness Lab and all of these things, I actually have my clients now write a letter from their future self to their present self. And so I have them pick an age and we talk about what that life is going to look like. And I am always amazed at the positive that they're describing in their lives and how grateful they are for their present self doing this work and how it changed their life. And it is so uplifting instead of like this,
Yeah.
going back into like, why are we going back into these things?
Hmm.
And especially in an early stage of recovery when we are in that, like, it's not always easy to leave behind an addiction. It's
Yeah.
actually difficult sometimes. So, like, digging into those hard things early where we could just build ourselves up first, and then we have tons of energy. We have this resilience that we've built. Now, if we want to go start back and look at that shame, look at those old experiences, we're in a very different place than we are in the first,
Mhm.
30, 60 days.
Well, and let's talk about why that works and why that's so powerful. This letter writing and this connecting to that future self. And it's allowing our brain to experience it as if it's already happening. And basically what that means is the neurochemistry is actually released. All of that feel good stuff is flowing through your brain doesn't know the difference. It's like I always joke with my clients, I'm like, "You could worry yourself sick with shame and anxiety and stress about what you've done, or you could literally hope yourself, like, healthy." Where you're like, that same the just like the same neurochemistry can put you in a spiral, you can give yourself neurochemistry to go the other direction, and that is incredible to me. What have you learned about that?
I tell people all the time, our brains are real stupid. They will believe what we tell it.
Yeah,
Right? Have you ever given yourself a hug and you're like, your brain's like, that feels really nice. Or you're just giving yourself a hug and your brain
yeah,
think it feels great.
yeah,
Like our brains will believe what we tell it. So if we are telling it this story of my life is going to be better and look how great things are and I have invested all this time and energy and you are building those feel good chemicals, you are building new neurotransmitters in your brain. You're actively rewiring your brain by
mhm,
doing something so simple like a letter from your future self,
yeah.
that's you we're telling ourselves a completely different story about who we
Mhm.
are. And our brains will believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have my clients do something similar, and a lot of times and I'm one of these people too where I'm guilty of, like, I wanna get to the good stuff, like, I'm a fast learner, I wanna learn, and I'm like, "You actually have to slow down and do this work. You have to actually put pen to paper," and the science around that is really cool when you actually write something, the way your left and right brain connect, and that's when the real chemistry starts to happen, and then it becomes so familiar because your brain's like, "Ooh, I've seen that. I've tasted that. I'm much more likely to go in that direction now." And that's why manifestation, as woo-woo as it sounds, actually works because your brain has seen it. And it's like,
Mm,
we've talked about this. We've written this down 100 times. We can do this?
right. I love manifestation. I got into it like a year ago. Somebody was like, "You should read this book." And then I was listening to some podcasts. And I think it's one of those things where we can start to draw in on like you can start to really picture this future state.
Yeah.
And your brain does not know that that is not what it is, right? It's
Yeah.
gonna believe it. And I think I remind my clients every single day, your brain will believe what you tell it. You've
Yeah.
already done this. You've you wired your brain for addiction. You had that power.
Mhm.
You can wire your brain for something new. That power exists within you. So don't discount this idea that I can't rewire my brain. You already did it. You
Yeah.
wired your brain for addiction. Let's wire it for something else.
Yeah. That's really cool. I love the work you're doing. So tell us a little bit more about your 100 days. Do you have any programs coming up? And is your program the 100 days?
So I have 2 programs. I'm almost always running. So 100 Days of Sobriety is my signature program. That is a one-on-one coaching program for 13 weeks. Um, the first month is kind of similar for everybody. The last month is we always do values priorities and goals in the last month, but the middle month is always something different. Everybody has like some different thing they need to work on, and that's where like experience as a life coach comes in versus
Mhm.
like just sobriety work or we dig into kind of more of that life coaching. So 100 days of sobriety is one-on-one, but then I just finished a group coaching program called Happy AF, which was entirely focused on happiness and building happiness in our lives. And there were people in there that were in recovery and people who weren't. It was a really great group. And so it was
Mhm.
a very different kind of coaching. And this spring, I'm taking the best of those two programs, 100 Days of Sobriety and Happy AF. And I've created a new program called Spring Break. And that kicks off March 19th. It's a group coaching program. It's 8 weeks, and we are going to go through the happiness, the science happiness pieces. We're going to go through those triggers. It's really about taking a break from alcohol. I constantly remind people that all we need is a glimpse. We need a glimpse of what our life could be on the other side of this, because when we're in it, we can't even see it. We can't picture what that life could be. So 8 weeks is enough time to build some of this resilience, to build some of this happiness, and to get that glimpse into what could be so you can decide what you want to do. You're making an informed decision about what's next.
That's really cool. Yeah, I know a lot of times when I'm talking to people about how, like, they want to know how long does it take? When am I cured? And then they forecast out in their life. I'm like, when can I actually fit this in? When can I do this? And I'm like, that's kind of the wrong mindset to start with. This is such a huge shift mentally. And so, if you had to give somebody just that baby step that they could take, that if they're hearing this and they're like, okay, I don't know if I'm ready to sign up for a program, that sounds like a huge commit. Like, what would be just something they could start in their life right now to kind of find this bridge?
Yeah. I recommend a mindfulness practice. Um, so I have my clients work on this early in recovery, especially the clients that I work with who aren't ready yet to fully give alcohol up. So I work with clients who quit on day one and they stay sober for 100 days. And I have clients who are tapering or working on reduction over the course of our 100 days. They're with a goal of abstinence, almost all of them.
Hmm.
But one of the things we do is a really simple mindfulness practice where we have that trigger, that craving, and all I want to do is before we act on the craving, before we take our drink, before we get that reward
Hmm.
of the dopamine hit, we pause. What really happens when I drink? What do I want my life to look like? What would happen if I made a different decision right now? What if I chose not to drink? Just going through those three things
Hmm.
and then deciding what I want to do, whether that's drinking or not drinking,
Yeah.
we've started that process of rewiring that reward system. And that's a really important first step. And that's based on Dr. Judd Brewer's research into smoking cessation, which is a
Mhm.
fantastic program. And that idea that all we have to do is disrupt that reward system a little bit and we
Yep.
can start to see improvement.
I love that. Yeah, I use James Clear's kind of like habit hacking approach there to kind of hack that little, yeah, that habit loop, and to just give your brain an alternative. And easier said than done. But again, when you visualize and you get intentional and you practice, and that's what coaching does for people, is it takes this, like, "Ooh, I would like to do that," and I'm guilty of this too, like, I love to learn things, but to put things into practice, there's a difference between having information and transformation, and that's what coaching programs make people do. It puts you in this environment with a little skin in the game, and it says, "Okay, I'm committing to this. I'm gonna put time into this." And I think that's the difference for a lot of people. Like, I didn't fully make my shift, until I hired a coach. I think I left that detail out with you when I talked to you earlier. I read 2 books that really flipped the switch for me, but then I hired an alcohol-free, like a sobriety coach that I worked with for 4 months to help me navigate the awkwardness that was my life, and it's part of the reason I became a coach myself, because it was so transformative for me to say, "At this time, once a week, I'm gonna meet with somebody, I'm gonna work on this." And that's what these programs do for people, is you say, "Oh, I can't commit to something like that." You're committing to a small chunk of time each week to work on this. And that's where change lives.
Yeah, it is so important. I wish that I would have had that resource when I started.
Yeah.
I didn't know of any alcohol-free coach. I'm sure they were out there 10 years ago, but,
Yeah.
um, I went to a kind of one-size-fits-all program,
Hmm.
and, um, it was helpful, but if I could go back and change anything, it would be like that one-on-one experience of meeting with someone who knows me and who
Yeah.
it can help me through these things. And when I'm like, I'm struggling with this, like, oh,
Yeah.
you could try these things. And if those don't work, you could try these things. Let's regroup next week after you put some of those in practice. And then we'll
Yeah.
see, how that worked out. I think that is so helpful. There's also some accountability,
Yeah.
right, with a coach. Like,
Mhm.
I've had clients show up and like, I probably would have drank this week, but I
Yeah.
didn't wanna come back and tell you that I drank.
Yep.
And if that helps us get through a day, I think that that's really pretty amazing too.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think people hire coaches for nutrition, people hire coaches for some fitness, and arguably this is bigger and more impactful on your life than either of those. Being able to change your relationship with alcohol is something that should be number one on your list because it's going to trickle down and impact, most importantly, your happiness, but your overall health, wellness, and that of like everyone you touch in your life too.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, it invaded my life in ways that I couldn't even see. And
Yeah.
so, once you start to disentangle it, like, oh, I could have something completely different here in my life. My relationships change, my work changes, everything in my life changes. And with this one fairly simple thing that
Yeah.
takes a lot of energy to get rid of.
Absolutely. If you could leave our listeners with one thought about sobriety and happiness, what would it be?
That's a great question.
And put you on the spot.
Embrace happiness in your life. It is really easy to get stuck in a habit of happiness is not here, it's somewhere else. And
Mhm.
if I could just find it, then I will be happy. Whether it's a relationship we want to be in, a job we want to have, more money, or just a different state of our lives, we think someday I will be happy, but it's not today. And choose happiness today because it is everywhere. It's surrounding you. And once you see it, you will not want to give it up.
I love it. Well, thank you, Austin, for being on here today. Where can people find you?
So on my website, austinjcarr.com, and it's Karr. And all my social media, TikTok, Instagram is Austin J. Carr as well.
All right. Thank you so much. And be sure, I will put everything in the show notes, guys. Be sure to check out his spring break program. I'm excited to see who is inspired by your story and your unique take on sobriety coaching. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Ellie. It was great.
Hey, friend. If you've ever wondered why your gut is still mad at you after quitting alcohol, bloating, cravings, sluggish digestion, I've got you. Your gut took a hit, and unfortunately, a lot of the food we eat isn't doing our gut any favors either. But the good news, you can heal it, and I made it really simple for you. Head over to my show notes and get my free guide, How to Heal Your Gut After Alcohol, because popping a probiotic alone won't cut it. I know because I've been there. It wasn't until I followed this simple 5-step plan that I noticed huge improvements in my gut health. Big win. And something you can easily do too. So grab this free resource and get started today. All right, let's get into the show.